Okay, stay where you are.
Is this reality? No, I don't feel okay. I need my kaleidoscope of colors to lead the way. I'm riding in my car and I'm coming on around the bend. It's a chase, this twisted race. I'll be on top again. I'm not gonna let you take me down. It's gonna be the whole 9 yards or nothing.
Hi, I'm Tom Mealy, and welcome to another edition of Legal Straight Talk. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce a different type of attorney here, Sandy Gumerove. And Sandy is a special needs attorney. Now, this is important because on our prior shows, we've spoken about several issues of law, sometimes pertaining to personal injury where people are hurt. And, it doesn't stop there. And what Sandy's going to explain to us today is what is the next step? What happens if you've had a child or you've had somebody who was severely injured and needs special needs? So it's my pleasure to introduce tonight Sandy Gumerove.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Did I get that right?
You got it right.
I get that right.
You got it right.
Special needs attorney. I've been involved in law for 30 years now. And I have to be quite honest with you. I didn't know that area exists. And the more we spoke off camera and prior to the show, it's a very important aspect in a lot of different areas with special needs. Tell us briefly, what does a special needs attorney does?
What we do is we work with individuals and families who have disabilities. So much of my practice comes out of the fact that I have a daughter with developmental disabilities who has special needs, as it's referred to. And I found I had to work my way through that whole business of how do I get Lauren what she needs, both when she was a child and now that she's an adult, to ensure that she has a good quality of life, participates in the community, and is happy. And so what I decided to do with my practice when I started it, and I've been doing this for about 25 years, is that I wanted to work with families and individuals who had disabilities and help them through that maze, whether it's special education, or it's guardianships, or it's life planning, to be able to assist families to find their way, because it was hard for me. And I'm a lawyer, I'm educated, I'm articulate. I know pretty much how to work the system, and it was hard. So if it was hard for me, I felt...
I can only imagine what it's like for the average person.
Right, that's exactly how I felt.
Let's talk about disabilities, and not necessarily disabilities that, you can be born with these disabilities.
Yes.
Okay, so, today, it's very difficult, especially with the new Medicare and Medicaid laws, with Social Security. I know firsthand, even attempting to try to get somebody on Social Security, it's a nightmare. So somebody out there, let's say that somebody out there has a child that is now becoming of age. I'm going to start small and I'm going to work up. Child is born, the child is 5 years old, and it's starting to show some disabilities or some things that don't seem quite right. Why is it necessary for them to contact you?
Often families find it difficult to navigate the special education world. Special education services under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA, which was passed in '75, starts really at birth. There's early childhood intervention, and there's preschool, and then there's school age. Children with disabilities can stay in school until 21, but often parents have difficulty getting school districts to provide the services and supports to enable a child to move on into the world the purpose of the IDEA was to prepare a child with disabilities, provide that child with special education services according to their unique needs for the purposes of further education, independent living, and future employment. And so the goal of the educational system for children with disabilities is to allow them to be independent and employed in the community. And many times that takes a lot of support. And sometimes school districts and parents don't agree. And we often work with families who are having difficulty getting the services that they believe are appropriate for their child.
Does the school district, so in other words, if the school district is giving that parent a little bit of an issue, do you take the school district to court? Do you
Generally, I'll tell you.
file any kind of a motion or an action to get that school district to say, you know what, we have to do this? And second part of the question is the municipality or the school district, do they have a responsibility to the child?
A school district has a responsibility under IDEA to provide every child with a disability an
IDEA,
education.
I'm sure they don't-
Individual with Disabilities Education Act. Has an obligation to educate every child with a disability to age 21.
Regardless.
Unless the child has met graduation requirements. So if a child can meet graduation requirements before that, then they can graduate. Generally, my clients are students who can't meet graduation requirements and generally will age out. But what we do is we will attend Committee on Special Education meetings with parents. That's the committee that develops what's called the Individual Education Plan, the IEP, most people call it, that provides the services and supports that the child needs to be successful in school. If we are unsuccessful at a Committee on Special Education meeting, we will bring an impartial hearing request, and we will file a complaint.
Is that brought in Supreme or is it brought in Family?
It's a separate proceeding. It's an administrative proceeding under the Education Department. So what happens is you have an impartial hearing, then you have
An impartial hearing with a
hearing
administrator
officer,
or a judge?
With a hearing officer.
Okay.
With a hearing officer, which can be appealed to the State Review Office. And if you fail at both of those levels, then you go to federal court.
But if they have an obligation to do this, and they know they have it, why do they push it to this level?
Well, there are different views. Two people can have a different perspective on the same child. Some districts, I think, do it to save money. The IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, does not have any financial aspect to it. If a student needs a service or a support, then the district must provide it. But, different people have different perspectives. I also know that districts often, because it happened to me, districts often will make families feel as if they're doing you a favor. I'm giving you all these services. Isn't this wonderful? Without ever addressing the fact that maybe a child needs something different than what they're offering. I have several cases pending now. I have one case now where we have a child, a 17-year-old with autism who has really severe issues with leaving his home. And we needed services to come into the home to give him the skills to leave his home to go into an educational setting. I believe we recently
And
settled that
who's responsible to
case.
pay that? Is that
The school
the
district.
state or the school district?
The school district.
So if the child does not want to leave the home to go into a school district, the school district is responsible to pay for the services to go to the home in order to work with the child to have him come to school.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot more complicated. There's a lot of complications in it, but the basic message is many families don't know that they have rights. The IDEA protects not only children, but it protects the parents. And it protects parents' rights to participate in educational decisions made about their children. And if the parents in the district disagree, they can bring an advocate or an attorney to those meetings and raise those issues, as with anything else.
Interesting. All right, so that's on children now. What about people that are trying to, let's say they're injured for whatever reason and they want to apply for Social Security? Do you work in those areas as well?
We ensure that people are financially qualified for either a supplemental security income, SSI, or Social Security or Medicaid. We don't do the applications. We have Social Security disability lawyers who we call upon to assist our clients in applying or appealing any negative decisions by the Social Security Administration. But we frequently work with families who have children with disabilities who at age 18 can apply for SSI, Supplemental Security Income, in ensuring that financially the child qualifies. So SSI has a $2,000 limit on assets. Okay, that's very little for a person's lifetime. However, there's a law that created something called a supplemental needs trust. And a supplemental needs trust is a special kind of trust where you can, by law, have tens of thousands of dollars and still qualify for SSI and Medicaid. Now, you may say to me, okay, we have a child, they've turned 18, we have them apply for SSI and Medicaid. Why do they need that? And that's often a question. Why do people with significant disabilities need SSI and Medicaid? Well, the answer is not medical insurance. The answer really is that all of the adult services for people with developmental disabilities or mental health issues are paid for through Medicaid dollars. So my daughter lives in a residence operated by AHRC Nassau. She goes to an AHRC day program, and those programs are paid for through Medicaid dollars. And it would be almost impossible for you or me to support someone for their lifetime because it's a very expensive proposition. My daughter has medical issues as well as developmental and intellectual disabilities, so she's going to need 24/7 support for the rest of her life. That becomes extraordinarily expensive for everyone individually. And I do want to go back to one thing. I did say that it's not for medical insurance,
Right.
which often puzzles people. Well, we all know that in the United States now, children are covered on their parents' insurance to age 26.
Correct.
Children with disabilities, the onset of which is prior to age 22, are entitled to stay on their parents' insurance as long as their parent has family coverage.
Really?
So my daughter, who is 33, is on
Is
our
still
health
entitled
insurance.
to stay under your health
Yes,
insurance?
and she has my private health insurance, and she has Medicaid.
Right.
And Medicaid is good for a lot of things, not necessarily doctors. Not a lot of doctors accept
Right,
it.
we find that to be the case, that a lot of doctors won't accept Medicaid. I guess it's because of the fee schedule, let's face it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it is. So they won't accept it. Let me ask you a question. If an older individual is in need of special needs and is sent to a nursing home, or let's say goes into a hospital, and the hospital has determined that that individual is not capable of going home, even though they have a husband or a wife, vice versa, and it is imperative that that individual go into now a nursing facility full-time. Do you intervene with that? I know there's issues with that, especially under Medicaid now, where Medicaid is now paying for that stay. Do you get involved with that?
That's really an elder law issue. If you have someone who is elderly, who is going to need nursing home care, that's not something we do. But
Even
what
though
we-
it's special needs?
Even though, well, they have skilled nursing care needs, which may be different. If it's due to dementia or it's due to an illness that requires skilled care. But I'll tell you what we do. I had a client in today who has a 40-year-old developmentally disabled son who is in the hospital right now, and he's on a vent. And the hospital wants to discharge him to a nursing home. Well, a nursing home doesn't really know how to work well, generally speaking, with people who have developmental disabilities and are not verbal. So we were able to contact one of the Office of Persons with Developmental Disabilities agencies, and we're working with them and the Office for Persons with Developmental Disabilities and their local field office for an emergency placement for this person
Wow.
in an intermediate care facility operated by an OPWDD agency. because they know how to work with someone who's
Sure,
nonverbal.
sure.
We
Sure,
do
they
get
aren't
involved
trained.
in
You're
that.
absolutely right. They're not.
I mean, the other thing, we often work with other attorneys. So we've worked with personal injury attorneys because they often have clients who need Medicaid, for example. And so they get personal injury awards. They can lose their Medicaid because they have more than $14,850 in the award. So we'll work with those people to have that money put into a supplemental needs trust. We work with trust and estate lawyers.
I mean, let me back up for a second. If a personal injury individual, let's assume, gets involved in an accident, right? Now, I'll give you a case in point. We have a case where we have 3 individuals who were very severely burnt in an explosion. No insurance, and they were rushed to the hospital. They put them under Medicaid, I'm assuming. One is under 20 years old, one is under 30, and one is under 50. But there was no insurance. Now, they are on Medicaid. The problem with personal injury is even if we were able to get an award for those individuals, Medicaid, under Obama's new law, I guess, we have
Right.
to reimburse. Does your services come into play at that point?
Our services can come into play because that money, if they were to receive an award, we could put that award into what I call a Medicaid payback supplemental
But
needs
Medicaid
trust.
is requiring 100% back on the
No.
medical.
Well, 100% back only to the extent of what was paid for those people for that injury.
So let's assume they're in the hospital and that bill is $500,000, which it very well could be.
Yes.
Multiple surgeries, skin grafting, et cetera, et cetera.
We've been very successful in negotiating Medicaid liens such as that. That would be a Medicaid lien against the award, to reducing those liens to a point where we can move the balance of the money into a supplemental needs trust. Now, at the end of the day, at the death of the beneficiary of the injured person, any money left in that trust has to go back to repay Medicaid, because Medicaid was entitled to the money up front.
If the
But-
individual dies, any money that's left has to go,
Right.
it's not transferable
But
to a spouse.
Correct. However, during that person's lifetime, they could use the money up. There may be nothing left for Medicaid. And we have been successful, particularly, well, in tragic cases like that, I think we would be pretty successful, particularly if there was limited insurance. So many times in a car accident, for example, limited liability may be $100,000, but there may be a traumatic brain injury.
We see most of those at $25,000.
Whatever it is, and we've been successful in negotiating those down to a relatively small amount, to $10, $12, $15,000, and the balance of the money goes into a supplemental needs trust, which can be used for
Is
the
that a
benefit of the
stipulation
person.
with Medicaid? That
It's
the
a
money
law.
is put into a supplemental?
Well, you can't, if you don't put it into a
But
supplemental
let's
needs
say you
trust,
put it
they'll
into your
lose.
pocket.
Well, if you do, then you're going to lose your Medicaid. Remember, you have an asset limit of $14,850. So if you get $25,000 and you keep the whole $25,000, you're going to lose your Medicaid.
Well, you can't. You have to by law give that back to Medicaid.
You have to, or negotiate the lien.
We find that a lot of times that Medicare will, but Medicaid will not.
We've been using the Auburn decision and working with Medicaid on Long Island, in both counties and New York City, and we've been pretty successful. Because there's a recognition, and I think the public policy behind supplemental needs trusts is that there's a recognition that people with these really severe disabilities need more than either $825 from SSI plus the Medicaid benefits, or at some point they may go on Social Security disability, and that's going to be $1,500 to $2,000.
Right.
And that's not a whole lot of money to live here. So we've been successful. I'm not saying that it would work in every case, but the cases that I've worked on, we've been pretty successful.
That's a good thing to know. So if people are involved with this type of situation, or they know somebody that's involved, obviously they should contact you
Yes.
right away. Let me ask you another question regarding, and again, this falls into special needs, handicap accessible ramps, handicap accessible housing. Somebody gets into an accident, or, and it doesn't even have to be an accident, but whatever the case is, they become disabled and now they need special needs within the home. How does that work?
If they are on Medicaid, Medicaid will pay for, there is a Medicaid waiver program that will pay for ramps and will pay for bathroom renovations. If there is a supplemental needs trust that has funds in it that are available, and there are certain things or a certain ramp the family wants that Medicaid will not pay for, the trust can pay for it. But there are,
But
Medicaid
let's assume
will
there is
pay-
no trust
Medicaid-
fund.
Medicaid will pay for ramps. They will pay for certain bathroom renovations.
What about kitchen?
They will pay for hoists. And I think it depends on the kitchen. You have to talk to them and see what the.
But
changes
Medicaid
are.
would do this. Now, if the individual has somebody who unfortunately was hurt or injured or whatever the case may be, and now is confined to a wheelchair or bed for that matter, I remember, I've been in personal injury a long time, and I've seen people that were confined just to a bed, and they stare at the ceiling all day long, which is horrendous.
Horrific.
Medicaid has an obligation to actually renovate their living environment to conform to whatever it is that they may need.
There is, the Medicaid laws provide that Medicaid will pay for it. And I know this because I have clients that we've done this for. Hoists, so that you can, a hoist system on the ceilings, so that a person can be lifted out of bed. It's not good for a person to be in bed all the time. So they can be taken to a bathroom and put into a bath or a shower. I know that they have renovated bathrooms and ramps. From personal experience, I don't know about kitchens.
Okay.
But I know that the others, because I have clients that we've worked with to get those benefits.
And these are all things that your office takes care of.
We work with them, with families, or if we don't do it ourselves, we have people who do it. We try and keep costs down for clients. So we have contacts within Medicaid Service Coordination and at Medicaid and at the various agencies to work with families to get these.
Your average cases that come through your office, are they children or are they adults?
That's a really good question. I would say about a third of our practice is special education cases, and the balance tend to be people over the age of 18. And I'm saying 18 because, the estate planning for families, because again, we don't want anyone with a disability that needs government benefits to inherit money. We want that to go into some kind of supplemental needs trust for the rest of the family at the death of the disabled person. But we try and encourage people, if you have someone who doesn't have capacity, who has a developmental disability and needs a decision maker, to get guardianship. We do a lot of guardianship in our office. We do a lot of estate planning and supplemental needs trust work. We get involved in assisting clients, as in the case I mentioned before, in working the system and getting to the right people to get appropriate adult placements.
Guardianship, let's talk about that for a minute. Guardianship, individual lives on his own, getting up in age, now needs help. They can contact you.
Well, they can contact us, but our niche is not the elderly. That type of guardianship.
Not necessarily elderly. Let's assume that, it's not somebody who's, let's take somebody between the ages of 20 and 40.
What's the disability?
They're starting, their mind is going, or, they need somebody to start making decisions for them.
If we're talking about traumatic brain injury, if we're talking about someone with a developmental disability such as autism, intellectual incapacity, cerebral palsy, the developmental disabilities, we absolutely do those, and we do that in a guardianship called the 17A guardianship. If someone has a mental health issue and needs guardianship, or some other disability We do, that would be in Article 81, and we do them. But when we're talking about the elderly and elder law planning for Medicaid for someone going to a nursing home, for example, that's not what we do.
You hear a lot of horror stories about guardianships and people that take over the responsibility for individuals that have special needs. Is there anybody that is watching over the individual who is appointed?
That's a really good question, and that question comes up often. You know, for most of my clients, we're talking about family members, so we're talking about parents. And my experience has been in the great majority of cases, and there is always one or two, parents take care of their kids. Nothing changed when Lauren moved from 17 years old to 18 years old.
Right.
I still have her best interest at heart. I think more of the horror stories occur when we have third parties who are not related to the individual with the disabilities, to the beneficiary, for example, of the guardianship or the ward. If you are doing a guardianship in Supreme Court, the Article 81 guardianship, there's an annual report. Absolutely, and there's a court examiner, and there are people looking over the shoulder. In a 17A guardianship, there's much less oversight other than for funds. And
But
there
does
are
an
annual
individual
reports.
have to report? Let's take, the parent always watches over the child, but there comes a point where the child's now got to watch over the parent.
Well, not in these cases. But
Not in those particular cases,
Correct.
but if that child is now appointed as a guardian for that individual.
For the parent.
For the parent, is there somebody who oversees the financials that individual is appointed to work with?
Yes,
Because that's happening a lot now.
There's a very detailed annual report that's submitted to a person called a court examiner. The court examiner reviews the report, reviews the income and expenses, and you have to provide copies of checks and lists of everything.
You can't just go take that individual's credit card and go to Sears and buy a new wardrobe.
If you do, you're going to have to pay it back,
And if
because that's not your money. And you
Okay.
can go to jail, because you've committed a crime, you've
Yeah.
stolen.
We've
Now-
got a few minutes left here. I just want to, we've got about a minute left. If you were to describe, or if you were to tell our audience something about what you do and why they should come to you in any specific case, what would you tell them?
I would say to them, I deal with my clients as if they're my family. I do what I do because I have a child with a disability, and I don't tell clients to do anything that I wouldn't do for my own child. So frequently, my clients and I are in the same position, and I have an in-depth understanding of the issues that they're facing.
I think that's very important. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, how do they reach you?
Our phone number is 516-822-3397, or we can be reached by email at smsmary@smgesq.com,
Or whatever's on the screen right
or
now.
whatever's on the screen right now.
There you go. All right, thank you very much. And this has been another edition of Legal Straight Talk. This was a very interesting conversation. There's a lot of people out there that need these services. I, for one, did not know they even existed, and I've been in this business a long time. If you have any questions, if you have a child with special needs, if you're having issues with the schooling or the municipality, or you have a grown-up, give Sandy a call. Talk to her. Set up an appointment. Understand what you can and cannot do before you make a mistake. Thanks for watching Legal Straight Talk. We'll be back next week with another edition. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jerry Parisi. Join Tom Mealy and Tommy Marr right here on Cablevision Channel 20 each week for an interesting episode of Long Island View.